Hey everyone, this is Brian from the Tennis IQ podcast. Josh and I hope that you're enjoying the content and discussions that we put out week after week. If you would like to support the podcast and help us to continue to produce quality episodes, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Currently, we have two tiers of support, $3 per month and $7 per month. So again, our Patreon page is patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Thank you so much. And now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Josh Berger.
And I'm Brian Lomax. And our topic for discussion today is something that every tennis player encounters in every single match, every single practice, and that's mistakes. And we are going to cover this topic of mistakes from a lot of different angles today. Because as I just said, we all make them. And most of us probably have a kind of negative disposition toward mistakes. We don't necessarily like them. We may not understand their full role in the sport or certainly in our growth as players. And I think we want to talk today about having or coming up with more productive attitudes toward mistakes, delineating between what is a good mistake and a maybe bad mistake or not so good mistake, and how we have to look at these to be more realistic, I think, in terms of how your tennis matches will go, your practices will go, your career, your learning, etc. So Josh, I know we were talking a little bit before we began recording today's episode about some ideas around this, and I thought you actually had a good place to start the conversation, which is really what is what should be perhaps one's attitude about mistakes, toward making mistakes, and how they occur in both practices and matches.
Yeah, so I think a way that I like to think about it, and something that I will talk to athletes that I work with about is um, everybody makes mistakes. Players that junior players, adult club players, college players, so, professional players, the best in the world. Everybody makes mistakes, and everybody makes errors. Everyone misses shots, and it's a part of the game. It's part of being a person that you will make mistakes. So I think when it comes to that mindset, I think a big piece of it is not to fear mistakes, not to try to avoid them, um, but to try to play in a way that you have figured out is your best playing style, and which I think for a lot of people is going for your shots, being aggressive. And again, that's going to look different for different types of people. Some people have, games where they in general play more aggressively. Some people are more consistent. But in general, trying to go for your shots, trying to play to win rather than playing to avoid losing or avoid missing or avoid mistakes, right? Understanding that if you're not going for it, if you're not missing sometimes, if you're not making mistakes, that probably that means that you're holding back in some way, maybe not going for your shots as much as you could be. So I think getting to that point where you can accept that mistakes will happen and accept that you will make them, but commit to playing in the style that you've chosen ahead of time, and really commit to that. Mistakes do happen. Well, you hopefully can reset and put them behind you one at a time as they occur. I think is really key, and I think is an important way to start off this topic, because again, everyone who's listening to this, everyone who's stepped on a tennis court has made mistakes, and you certainly will the next time you're out there as well. So let's get to the point where going into a match, going into practice even, we accept that they will happen, and that ultimately that's okay, because it's part of being a tennis player, and it's part of going for our shots, and part of playing in the way that we need to play in order to play our best. Are there things that we can do to minimize mistakes? Yes, hopefully yes. Can we try to focus on our decision making in terms of what shot we want to go for. Think about, how often do we go cross court compared to down the line? How much spin do we put on the ball? What is our footwork like to get to the ball? What are we doing to set up each shot? But getting to that point where we're recognizing the reality of mistakes and not fearing them or trying to avoid them, I think is really key.
Yeah. I think also the sort of the uncomfortable truth about mistakes is that that's how we as human beings learn. In a sport like tennis, where perfection is actually not required, mistakes are more, in many ways, in terms of the scoring system, they're more permissible. You can make mistakes and still win matches. And so I also like to think about mistakes. Are they being made in sort of in the service of learning and improving my game? Or are we potentially making mistakes that are avoiding losing, are maybe avoiding trying something new with, where we want our game to go? And so I think it would maybe be helpful to have some to go through, what I think a good mistake is, and then what I think, maybe a not so good mistake is, or a bad mistake, right? So I think good mistakes, going along with some of the things that you were saying, Josh, is when you're trying to do the right thing. You're playing to win. If your game is being aggressive, then you're going for your shots, and it just didn't happen for you. And of course, you need to figure out why, and try to make an adjustment after that. Because if you keep making the same mistake over and over again, maybe that good mistake starts to, fall into the category of not so good anymore, because we're not learning from it. So I think when the goal is learning with the mistakes that we're making, that's good. Um, you know, if we're thinking back to, say, our episode or our conversation with Nick Saviano, relentless growth. If we're constantly thinking of growth and the shots that we're hitting, and maybe making mistakes on, but they're making us or bringing us closer to the player we want to be. If they're all growth oriented types of mistakes, that's good. I think also good mistakes are ones where you're being more active rather than passive. So you're actively trying to do something, trying to create something. And that could be aggression, but it could also maybe just be creating opportunities and openings. And really, this is where I think the road to proficiency is. We make a certain number of mistakes um, before we actually really, really learn something. To truly learn something, you need to experience it over and over and over again. And there may be a certain number of failures that you have to experience before something really clicks and it sinks in and you have really learned it in more of a physical sense, more in your body as opposed to an informational way, right? We can talk to people, Josh, about their ground strokes and their technique, and they may get it rationally, but they actually performing it and feeling it and knowing how the ball feels off the racket, that's a whole different thing that needs to be experienced and learned from a very physical way, right? So I think those are really what I would think of as good mistakes. When I think of mistakes that are not so good or bad, I think these are often due to being more passive, and um, and sometimes this example is something that I hear, and I also have personally done this. But I think it's almost like kind of a little bit insidious, and we don't want it to happen so much. Is, let's say I'm playing someone who I know if I just keep the ball in, they'll they'll make errors, and I'll win pretty easily, but I don't really have to do anything. Is that good? Did I really further my game? Yeah, I got to the next round, but did I actually further my game at all? It's debatable because I didn't. I chose to just do something very passive, which is just keep the ball in, and let the other player more or less self-destruct because maybe the level is not there, right? So, to me, that might be one to consider as not great. That's not that approach perhaps is the mistake because I didn't push myself. I probably could have challenged myself to do something that would help me in a later round to play better. So I think that's one thing. But so passive can also be just about um, even in a match in which we're not necessarily favored, we're not doing enough. We're we're just simply playing and playing and playing, and we're not getting creative or really taking any risks whatsoever. So I think that can be a mistake. I think sometimes bad mistakes when we do this when we're trying to avoid losing, it's because of pressure, expectations, maybe frustration, that we're simply avoiding doing the right thing. Maybe it doesn't feel comfortable. And then we may even make mistakes in doing the things that we shouldn't be doing. Um, and so that's problematic. I think we stop doing some of the right things when we're overly focused on winning, when we're more focused on being comfortable, right? So, for example, I think a poor decision would be if we've asked a player to try a new grip, whether that's with a serve, a volley, a forehand, and at some point during the match, the desire to win takes over and they go back into their comfort zone. That's a bad mistake, right in itself. And then you may even make mistakes with that particular stroke with the old grip. So that's even that's not good. I think these types of mistakes are made when learning is not the explicit goal, when something else is the explicit goal. So I think when I think about the good versus the bad, really if I were to bottom line the whole thing, it'd be good mistakes are made in the service of learning and improvement. Bad mistakes we would look at as you didn't really learn or improve your game here. And so why did we do that? Why did we make that decision? Because you're not going to get better today when you make those kinds of decisions.
Totally, totally. I mean, I think when I think of the difference, I think a good mistake is when you're going for the right shot, as you said, you're sort of doing it for the right reasons. You're doing it in order to learn, in order to grow, you've identified that this is the way that you ought to be playing, right? You ought to be going for your shots playing, let's just say playing aggressively from the baseline, or you're trying to, play in a way where you're trying to really play consistently, you're really trying to hit with heavy spin, maybe keep the ball deep, right? That might be a different playing style. Maybe you're trying to come into the net a lot, but there's a thoughtful approach that goes into it about how am I going to play best? What is the player that I'm striving to become, and can I get a little bit closer to that type of player that I'm trying to be today? And I think you bring up a good point there, Brian, in terms of those types of matches where maybe your opponent is not very consistent, and it feels like all that you have to do is keep the ball in play, and then that's how you can beat somebody. And I think I have fallen into that trap a number of times actually of just trying to keep the ball in those moments. And I've won some matches like that, but it's also, I think, gotten me in a lot of trouble because I think at a certain point in my playing, I think I became a little bit reliant on winning points like that and almost waiting for an opponent to miss and waiting for the opponent's mistake rather than being more aggressive, rather than going for my shots, rather than, forcing the issue a little bit more. And I think, it almost it almost encouraged me to play more like that. So I think, yes, sure, by playing that way in the moment, sort of short term, it feels like that's what's going to help you get to the next round. And I get that. And I think as a competitor, you do want to find a way to get to the next round. But I think it can also be very short-sighted if you're abandoning the the type of playing style that you're working on. If you're working on being more being more aggressive and stepping into the court more and going for your shots more, if you're trying to work on a new grip, as you mentioned, Brian, if you're trying to work on different areas of your game, and then when the pressure's on, when you're in a close match, when you really need to win points, you abandon that and you go back to something safer, a way where you can avoid mistakes, then you're not gaining that experience that's actually needed to get you to that point where you're trying to head. I know we've talked about this concept in the past of necessary experience, of having a situation, a match. Oftentimes it's a loss where you have an experience where maybe you didn't end up winning the match. Um, maybe you lost in the semifinals in a tournament, but through having that experience, then the next tournament or the next year when you play that again, you're able to win the tournament, and it was that experience that helped you get there. Or maybe maybe it's a loss to a certain player, but you went out and you went for your shots, you played the way that you wanted to play, and you lost. But then the next, again, in the next match, because of that experience, because of what you've learned, you're more well equipped. So I think this connects to that in terms of, and I know we talk about this concept oftentimes of, not just prioritizing our results, but prioritizing our process, prioritizing learning, prioritizing our development. And I think, if we can put that sort of short-term desire aside in terms of, okay, I want to win this match and I'm willing to abandon everything I'm working on in order to get there. And remember that I'm trying to become this type of player. And in order to do that, I need to play this type of way, that we can accept the mistakes that come along the way and on the route towards what we're becoming. We can accept losses, in fact, knowing that that's a part of that journey to become that player. And also knowing that if we, if we don't go for it, if we sort of play not to lose rather than playing to win, our capabilities, our ceiling as a tennis player is capped. We're limited in how good we can actually become because we're not playing playing in the playing style of the type of player of that caliber, if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. And I think you brought this up earlier, Josh, but I think really success on any particular day, the way I like to look at it is, did I close the gap between where I am today as a tennis player and where I would like my game to be? And um, the decision in terms of how we play and what we do and the kinds of mistakes that we make and what our goals are for that day really determine whether we do close the gap. And closing the gap doesn't mean you won the match, but it means that you went out there with the goal of trying to do something, whether it's a technical thing or a tactical thing or a mental thing, and you did it. And it doesn't mean you did it perfectly, but at least you did it. You experienced it. You got some reps at it. And knowing that, all right, I can build on today's experience so that in the future I will have success. When we have discussed the concept of everything is practice, a big part of that is we want people to practice their A game more. We don't want you to practice some sort of suboptimal way of playing in competition because that's going to be what you end up perfecting. And as you just said, that means your potential, how good you can get, will be capped because you're not willing to go beyond that, and or you have perfected a certain way of playing in competition that you're unable to get out of. And so if we can be looking at matches as simply opportunities to play your whatever your A game is and get as many reps at it so you can develop more clarity about it, um, then that game by itself will become more and more proficient and you will close the gap between where you are and where you want to be. So I think it's a really important perspective to bring to the court, is that these making of the making of mistakes is not inherently a bad thing. It is the path to learning. It is the path to becoming more enlightened about your own game or about a particular stroke. And it's not necessarily pleasant because many of us don't like making mistakes. We don't like losing points. But it's also done in sort of the cause of something bigger. And when we're presented with that sort of conundrum of, all right, I can just go out and just get balls in and win this match, or I could also challenge myself. Um, how do you want to look at that? Do you want to look at this as an opportunity to get better, or are you just looking at it? I just want to get to the next round, and so it becomes really, um, difficult. Is it that immediate gratification, or am I willing to also understand that there's actually a bigger prize here um, at stake? So I'll tell certain players who might do that. I'll say something to the effect of, you know, it's much more important that you try to become the player you want to be rather than just winning today. And you have to really value that. You know, who do you want to be here? To me, it's not a successful day if you win, but you made no progress on how you play the game. You have to learn something. I mean, the only thing you learn today is that, all right, you can outlast that guy or that girl, but you didn't push yourself at all. Sometimes from a tournament perspective, Josh, I get it. The path of least resistance through a tournament is important, right? Because many of these tournaments they're exhausting. Unless you're playing at a Grand Slam level, you're probably playing 2 matches a day. Maybe not, depends on the event, but many of us are playing 2, sometimes even 3 matches in a day. The faster you can get through some of these things, the better. Especially if you're projected to get to later rounds. So I do get that. But on the other hand, want to make sure that you are also playing to become the best player you can become. So I think it's a very tricky balance. For whatever reason, tennis seems to attract a lot of perfectionists. And I guess that's like kind of maybe the next piece I'd like to get into a little bit, is because to me, perfectionism is not reality. And as I said earlier, the sport of tennis doesn't require you to be perfect. Um, this is not figure skating. This is not, equestrian dressage, where, those athletes are actually being judged on form and technique, and mistakes are really problematic. In tennis, that's we can lose a ton of points. We've talked about that so many times, and that losing points also means making mistakes. So, what are we being perfectionists about? Why is that? Why is that a helpful thing? Why are we bringing that to the court? So, I'd be curious to get some of your thoughts on that topic, Josh.
Yeah, I think tennis for maybe different reasons, maybe we could explore this. I think tennis actually attracts perfectionists. Um, I think there's a lot of perfectionists that play the sport. It's an individual sport. It all falls on you. It requires a lot of technical ability. It requires a lot of repetition. It requires players to master a lot of different areas of the game, a lot of different physical capabilities, certainly mental as well. Um, and I think it really does attract a lot of perfectionists or people that have certain perfectionist qualities. Um, but at the same time, in no way is it a sport where you can be perfect. As we've talked about throughout this episode, you will make plenty of mistakes out there, and so do the best players in the world. I think a couple things that I would bring up is the book Winning Ugly, which I know we've talked about in the past, which is a book I certainly recommend to all tennis players to read, because it really changed my perspective on the game when I first read it in high school. Brad Gilbert, who got to the highest level of the sport, got to number 4 in the world without having, top tier strokes necessarily. He talks about how when you go out there, you don't have to be perfect. You have to be a little better than the guy on the other side of the net. You have the guy or girl or whoever is on the other side of the net. You have to find a way. And I think that's really what it's about. So can we get to a point where finding a way and problem solving and navigating sort of the obstacle course of a tennis match is prioritized over let's try to be perfect, let's try to score a 10 10.0 from all the judges, right? That's not how it is. It's not a competition of you against your opponent of, okay, my forehand is a 9.4 and my backhand is an 8.9 and my serve is a 7.4, but my volley is this score, and then we're going to add it up, and then my opponent's going to add it up, and whoever has the higher score wins. It's a number of points, one after another, that lead to games, that lead to sets, and ultimately matches. And it's okay, who can navigate the ups and downs of a match? Who can navigate the strengths and weaknesses of yourself and of your opponent? Who can handle all these things in the best possible way and not let the imperfections and the mistakes and the inevitable ups and downs that happen get in your way of performing. So I think that, that is the first piece that I would bring up, that it's, Brad Gilbert has brought this up. A lot of people have brought that up, that it's often about finding a way. It's often about being a little bit better than the person on the other side of the net, recognizing that there will be plenty of mistakes. And I think the other side of it is, if you can look at the statistics, right? You look at the statistics of an ATP or WTA match, you see a lot of errors. They, of course, have more, a greater share of winners compared to errors than college players or club players, junior players, but still a lot of errors. Also, if you look at the top players in the world, the best players, right? We look at an Alcaraz or a Iga Swiatek because they're both number one right now. Um, Even players like that will win only about 55% of their points over the course of a year. They're going to lose, right, close to 50% of their points, right around 45% of their points over the course of a year. They're going to make a lot of mistakes. So I think what's important here is, again, getting to that point of acceptance and having a system, knowing that you will make mistakes. Let's be realistic here. And I think, have logistically, let's have a plan for when mistakes happen. I think if we don't have a plan, one of two things can happen. Either you back down from trying to make mistakes, which we've talked about a lot in this episode up to this point, and maybe you stop going for your shots, you sort of play not to lose, just get the ball in, or emotionally can break down, right? Somebody makes a mistake, and I'm sure most people have either been there or have certainly seen it. You make a mistake and there's that emotional breakdown, right? Maybe they throw a racket. Maybe you yell at yourself. Maybe you swear at yourself. Maybe you hold it in and you're thinking about it, you're thinking about it, you're thinking about it, and that next point, it's impacted by it. So I think without having a plan for what you're going to do when mistakes happen, you get yourself in trouble. And I think, having a routine, having an in-between point routine that you can refer back to, um, visualizing how you want to spend that time in between points, especially after a miss, even visualizing the miss and visualizing how you spend that 20 or so seconds in between points, how you go about playing that next point afterwards can be very powerful. But let's be realistic. Let's plan out. Let's have a game plan for different situations that may occur. And one of those situations that is inevitable, and will definitely occur many times whenever you play a match is mistakes. So let's certainly have a plan for that.
Yeah, and I think acceptance of the fact that they will occur is a big part of it. I think that factors into what you're saying. Let's accept that the mistakes will occur. Let's have a plan for when they do occur. Um, when we've talked about things like resetting or reset button or letting go or flushing things so that you can dump the emotion of the mistake and move on to that next point. Because I think some mistakes, if we don't have the right perspective, can create emotions that are not productive. And so I think we have to come into a match with some tolerance for mistakes, knowing that they're going to happen. But what I also find interesting, Josh, is that a player's tolerance for mistakes may also be dependent on their level of confidence in that particular stroke. We were talking about this earlier. So some players who, let's say they have a strong forehand and a not as strong backhand. What I've noticed that pretty consistently amongst all the players I work with, regardless of age, and this is over the course of years, is that when they make the mistake on their stronger side, they more easily tolerate it because their level of confidence in that shot is much more resilient. That's sort of using some terminology here that Dr. Larry Lauer, USTA player development, uses. He likes to use a continuum of fragile confidence to resilient confidence. So the forehand, or the better stroke, has much more resilient confidence. Or, to use another metaphor, we've got a lot more money in the confidence bank on that particular shot. So when we, make a mistake on the side that we have more confidence in, we're able to just let it go more because we believe in that shot. We trust that shot. That shot has been there for us in the past. But let's say now we make a mistake on the side that we don't have so much confidence in. Our confidence is more fragile. Our confidence bank account is rather low there. That's when we tend to get more of that emotional reaction that is then not helpful. The body tightens up, the body chemistry changes, the level of confidence in that particular shot is reduced, and we start to have those reactions. And this can occur at any level, I would say, Josh. I've seen this at players who are around, 13, 14 UTR as well as at lower level. So, in that regard, when we have it's a combination of the stroke and confidence, we have to start working on how we feel about the stroke. If you are automatic, if you're going into a match and your sort of default position on whichever side you feels a little bit weaker is like, it's weaker, I don't trust it, I don't like it, then you're certainly more likely to make errors over there. Because every time a ball comes to that side, you're just going to naturally be a little bit tighter. You're going to naturally think more about, I don't want to make a mistake, rather than just, can you just create a feeling of how it is to hit that shot? Instead of overthinking technique and all this other stuff, think about how you treat the other side. The other side, you probably don't think technique at all. It's all just a feeling, and you just let it rip. And if you miss, you miss. If you make it, then of course you just move on. So it's just something else to be aware of as a player. Am I reacting a little bit more to mistakes on weaker parts of my game than I am on stronger parts? And perhaps part of the answer for me to handle my mistakes better is, let me understand how I'm approaching it with my stronger strokes. And can I feel like sometimes I'm doing like couples counseling, Josh, when I'm asking a player to fix their relationship with their serve or with their backhand, but that's really what it is. Can you have a better relationship with that stroke? Can you have a better perspective about that? Can you learn to enjoy hitting that stroke more rather than tensing up every time it comes there? Because that won't lead to good mistakes either, right? That would probably be put more into the bad mistake category because you're tensing up and you're just avoiding mistakes rather than doing what you really want to do on that side. So I'm really curious about your perspective about how players may look at different parts of their game differently.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. I think when it comes to a stroke that a player has historically had a harder time with, I think they are less accepting of that of missing that shot. I think there's maybe more water under the bridge. There's more history there. Um, there there's less trust of that shot itself. So when somebody misses, it can turn into, oh, here we go again. And they don't have the trust that, okay, yeah, I missed that, that time, but I've made, I've won a lot of matches with this shot in the past, and I know that, I know I can rely on it. Where when it comes to their strength, they have that totally different relationship. It reminds me of actually a golfer that I've been working with, and this particular player has struggled with his first shot off the tee. And every time it's time to hit that shot, he struggles with it. He starts thinking, he starts overthinking, starts, noticing the other players that he's playing with that are generally gathered in that area, and starts comparing himself to them. And when it's time to hit to putt, or when it's time to hit another sort of shot, he doesn't have any of those sorts of thoughts. He just pretty much, maybe takes a practice swing and goes out there and hits it. So I think it's sim whoops. It's similar in that way where when you've had that positive history, um it's a lot easier to be willing to, to get to a point where you're willing to take risks, um, because also that maybe there's more reward, right? That you have that greater capability. I think, when it comes to trusting yourself on maybe your weaker side, I think trying to embrace it as a challenge also could be helpful, trying to rather than thinking of it as a threat and okay, if I don't want to miss this shot because then that's going to get me in trouble in this game, but sort of viewing it as an opportunity to continue to grow, continue to become that player that you're trying to become, especially if it's a weaker, a shot that has been a weakness, right? Viewing it, this match is a great opportunity for me to get that shot to a higher level, for me to turn that weakness into eventually, hopefully, a strength, but first, less of a liability, right? So, can we shift that perspective on how we view that particular shot, and view it as a challenge to raise the bar with that shot on this particular day?
Yeah, so I think I don't know. I like this topic, Josh, because mistakes they're always going to be there. We're always going to make them. The more tolerance that we can build around them, the more confidence we can build in our strokes, the more that we can use mistakes as a pathway to learning and being better. Um, and when you try some of this stuff, let's say one of your shots is weaker, but you decide to go out there like, all right, I'm gonna hit through my backhand today. You may actually surprise yourself. You may actually win some points with that backhand that you had not ever really done before. Um, and then there's a certain amount of motivation to keep doing it at that point. But you never get that until you kind of get over the hump of trying it out and really wanting to believe in that shot and being willing to tolerate a few errors and maybe it not feeling good, all with the goal of learning and growth. I think what often gets in the way of us doing that with our weaker strokes is the fact that we're too primarily focused on winning in the result, and then that blocks our ability to even go get any growth out of that weaker shot.
Totally, totally. And I think part of it is acknowledging and accepting that it is a leap of faith, right? It is a leap of faith to put aside the sort of the short-term reward, right? The short-term reward for the delayed gratification. The short-term reward being, okay, I want to do everything in my power to win, right? And obviously we want to be the best competitors that we can be, but we don't want to do that by sacrificing something longer term. And I think by avoiding missing, by avoiding mistakes, by playing to avoid losing and hoping that our opponent makes a mistake or hoping that somehow we get lucky in that way rather than committing to our playing style that we're trying to play like trying to that player that we're trying to become, we sacrifice that long term. So I think it's a leap of faith to be able to look past this particular match, this particular day, and understand that we're trying to learn, we're trying to develop, we're trying to improve and continue becoming that player that we are aiming to become, right? And I think having some sort of a plan you can use the USTA development plan, for instance, but having a plan for, okay, over the next 3 months, let's just say, what is that player that I'm trying to become? Let's be very clear about that. What is that player that I'm trying to become? What do I need to serve like? What does my mental game need to look like? What does my footwork need to look like? From a strength and conditioning standpoint, what does that need to look like in terms of maybe, my nutrition and my sleep and my hydration and some of these different pieces. But let's be very clear about what that is. And I think for a lot of players, they don't necessarily have that sense for that player that they are trying to work towards and improve and become like on a day-to-day basis. So it can be easier to sort of sacrifice some of these things that we're talking about. So I think if that's clear and you have that clear vision, then it's a lot easier to work towards it and to recognize and be aware when you're slipping and when you're sacrificing something and not playing in that sort of a way.
Well, in fact, having that learning and development plan might increase your tolerance for mistakes because you know you're making them in service of the plan. Where if you don't have the plan, maybe you understand a little bit less the role of mistakes in your overall development because you're not explicitly thinking about your overall development. You're thinking more about your results and then treating development more as a secondary outcome of getting good results. Where in reality, like we've talked about with many of our guests, it's the other way around. The more that you focus on your development and growth, the secondary outcome is you start getting the results that you want. And that's a more proven path to becoming the best player you can become. You can certainly get results by focusing on results, but I think what we're saying is at some point your potential probably gets capped. And that cap is below most likely what you could have achieved if your main goal had been growth and development. And so perhaps the way you just ended that there, Josh, is one of the best ways of learning to um, integrate mistakes as more purposeful into what you're doing. Therefore, you can tolerate them a little bit more. Um, and even on the shots that you're not as confident on.
Totally, totally. And I think tolerance of mistakes is key, right? And I think, of course, nobody in the heat of the moment, right? There's an opponent on the other side. You're trying to win the match. Do you want to make a mistake? Of course not. But can we tolerate it? Can we understand that we made that mistake, but we were going for the right shot? Can we understand that we made that mistake, but that's the type of shot that we have decided that we want to be going for more? Can we, after a mistake, can we ask ourselves the type of question of was that the right decision? Was that the right shot or not? Was that a good mistake or not? Right? Not all mistakes are the same, nor should they be viewed as the same. So I think getting to that point where we can critically analyze mistakes and shots in the heat of the moment, and then again have that system of putting it behind us so that one mistake doesn't lead to many more, which we've probably many of us have been there or certainly seen it, but have a way where mistakes are viewed more objectively, and let's just simply see what happened with the mistake. Let's notice it, let's process it, let's hopefully learn from it, and then let's be able to put it behind us and be able to fully engage with that next point, that next moment, in order to give ourselves the best possible chance there. And then again, and also have a good game plan going into that next point of what is our playing style, what are the types of shots we're trying to go for, acknowledging and tolerating that a mistake is certainly possible here, but we still want to commit to the type of play that we have decided and decided that we want to play like, and set out to play in this way, and no, and committing, really trying to commit to playing in that style.
Right. Well, through this conversation, we hope that everybody who's listening has gotten some value out of perhaps some new strategies to learn to deal with mistakes, tolerate mistakes, so that you can further develop your own game and be able to handle them better emotionally on the court. Certainly, if people have feedback or questions about that, you can email us, and we'll do our best to help guide you through that, because this is something that is ever present in tennis matches and in tennis practices and so forth. And it's an important topic because we all want to be able to deal with it in the right way. Because I think if you were to ask everybody who's listening, do you want to become the best player you can become? Probably get about 100% response rate on yes, of course. I do. And this is a key ingredient to that. So I think great conversation, Josh. Thanks for engaging on that. And thank all of you for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for me and Josh, especially about this topic, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. You can also use the Twitter hashtag tennisiq. Additionally, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube, so you can be notified of new episodes. You can also check us out on Instagram. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiq/membership. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.